You could even say she covets you. She's a coveter. You're like free pizza at an anime convention. She can smell you, and she wants to consume you.
Man, I could really go for an extra hot, no-whip, white chocolate macchiato.
How do you follow up one of the finest FPS titles around? Well, you make a sequel that strips away a number of the elements that made the original so special. Some of it is a result of needing to build around the consoles available at the time. Some of it is having its foundations changed to copy elements from titles like Call of Duty. The end result is F.E.A.R 2, an above-average military shooter from the late 2000s with elements of horror, which as a game makes it just fine. I polled the channel to see how you felt about F.E.A.R 2. With around 2,100 total votes, 58% said it's fine, which for better lack of a word choice, is fine in a number of cases. However, this is not one of them. When you're following up F.E.A.R 1, one of the greatest FPS games ever made, that's not so fun. So let's take a look at F.E.A.R 2 Project Origin and where it went wrong, but also see what the game gets right, because there are flashes of brilliance where praise is well deserved. So what's the deal with the subtitle Project Origin? Well, this was the initial name for the game as it couldn't be called F.E.A.R 2. When development started for the first F.E.A.R, Monolith was not yet owned by Warner Brothers. Their publishing deal was with Vivendi. When under Warner Brothers, they owned the rights to the IP and the characters, but not the name F.E.A.R. That was owned by Vivendi. So they ran a contest for fans to name what the game should be called. This would come down to Dark Signal, Dead Echo, and Project Origin, which would be the one to win. But in a case of good timing, they would acquire the naming rights back to F.E.A.R just a few months prior to the game's launch. Vivendi would merge with Activision Blizzard in 2008. Number of IPs were dropped. Warner Brothers swooped in and bought the naming rights back to F.E.A.R. Project Origin was kept in the subtitle. So it was a happy ending here. Unlike another one of their properties, No One Lives Forever, which I covered in a previous video on its IP hell. For whatever reason, Monolith has always had various IP issues in regards with its publishers. F.E.A.R 2 doesn't take the two expansions of F.E.A.R into canon. Those were done by Timegate Studios. Those went in a different direction than what Monolith wanted to take the series. They saw them more as a what-if scenario. So like Barkley, Shup, and Jam Gaiden, the following game is considered canon. Initially there was going to be separate titles, one for PC and one for the consoles before they ended up merging. The original F.E.A.R was one of the last major large budget titles that was designed for PC in mind first. It released just prior to the 7th generation of consoles in the fall of 2005. This generation saw ballooning budgets and team sizes due to the move to high definition. I think it's a safe guess to say this played a reason in the titles merging. It wouldn't be as financially viable to release a large budget shooter focused on PC for early 2009 as opposed to the fall of 2005. And even at that point, it was on its way out. Of course, when you take consoles into consideration, a number of compromises have to be made in regards to the technology. More on that shortly. Another factor to consider is the rise of Call of Duty. F.E.A.R 1 launched just a week prior to Call of Duty 2. The success of Modern Warfare, the fourth entry released in late 2007, would have a huge impact on the industry. The COD military shooter blueprint would make its way through FPS titles. It was a dark time for the genre when everyone and their mother seemed to be copying it. F.E.A.R 2 does that to an extent, although not to the same extent as other FPS titles around this time frame. So with that, let's look at the combat in F.E.A.R 2. The original F.E.A.R had some of the greatest combat in an FPS title. F.E.A.R 2? It's fine, but nowhere close to the original. What went wrong? What changed? As I just mentioned, you can feel some of that Call of Duty influence. Iron sights have been added. First game was fine without them. As a result, hip firing becomes very inaccurate. A sprint has been added. It's one of those sprint for 3 seconds before getting winded kind of sprints. If you are going to do this, either give the player a good 10 to 15 seconds, or don't bother at all. At least regenerating health and 2 weapon limit wasn't added in. F.E.A.R 2 actually adds the amount of weapons you could carry from 3 to 4. On the topic of weapons, the first F.E.A.R had some of the best guns around. The shotgun, one of the best in any game I've played. The shotgun in F.E.A.R 2, it feels like a Nerf gun in comparison. That's the case for most of the weapons here, like the pistol for example, or the hammerhead which replaces the penetrator. It feels like I'm using a stapler gun.
Ow! What are you screaming about? For your alterations? Oh! Mr. Spot!
Now the shotgun can still cause bodies to explode, but it just lacks any feel or weight of the one in the original. One of the worst sins you could commit in an FPS title is a lackluster shotgun. It just boggles my mind just how different the shotgun feels in this game. The first F.E.A.R is my weapon of choice in most situations. Here, barely made use of it. The automatics, they're better and they're viable throughout the entire game. This is where you could feel that military shooter influence. The way the game is designed, they are extremely reliable, but they lack that excitement that the first game did with their guns. Thankfully, F.E.A.R 2 does have an excellent sniper rifle. It feels and sounds much better compared to the other guns here, and causes bodies to explode. Much more in line with something out of the first game. However, it's a bit of a replacement of the Type 7 particle weapon from the first F.E.A.R. There was something so satisfying to melt enemies down to their skeletons with it. I'm not sure why they didn't just go with this as the sniper choice instead. And while that Type 7 particle gun is still here, it shows up later and acts differently. One of the common complaints that the first F.E.A.R received were the confined, plain, repetitive environments. Well, this was addressed in F.E.A.R 2, but it's a case of one step forward and several steps back. Combine this with having to get the game running on consoles and you end up with a number of issues piling up on one another. While they did have a drab appearance, F.E.A.R 1's environments mesh beautifully with its combat. Combat areas were structured like multiplayer maps. They were open, you could circle around them, enemies could get the drop on you, but you could also get the drop on them. F.E.A.R at the time was cutting edge in regards to its lighting, its particle effects, physics, environmental damage. All these years later, it still looks great. A lot of small details like dust kicking up, for example, are still rarely used, or to the effectiveness F.E.A.R 1 made use of them. I'd love to explore these areas after combat to admire the destruction caused in the environment. In F.E.A.R 2, if not outright removed, they've been greatly scaled back. With hip-fire being very inaccurate, the game encourages you to use iron sights. This greatly reduces your field of view. You can't get the full view of the destruction you are causing. And even then, particle effects, environmental damage, ragdolls of enemies have been greatly scaled back. This is where you could really feel the design for consoles aspect of F.E.A.R 2 pop up. Compromises would have to be made in order to get the game running at a decent frame rate with console hardware at the time. Instead, more focus was put on changing up environments to feel less quote-unquote samey. Well, one of the reasons for the simple, samey environments in the first F.E.A.R was to let them push these kind of smaller details. One to this day that still helped the game stand out. One issue that rises with going with more unique environments and more details in them is that enemies don't pop out from them as much. In F.E.A.R 1, they were easy to spot due to the contrast they have with simple environments. What does F.E.A.R 2 do as a compromise? Enemies glow to help pop out from the environments. Yep, these are the same enemies that we face in F.E.A.R with a different look, even though F.E.A.R 2 begins during the end stretch of the first title. Go into slow motion and enemies will light up. Everything seems to glow in the dark now. Handy if you're driving so you could just run them over. It's one of those band-aid to a bullet wound solutions. All these issues pile up one on another and turn F.E.A.R mostly into just another shooter of the late 2000s timeframe. Better than most, but a major step down from the first. So what about the enemy AI? Is that still intact here? The first F.E.A.R is well known for having some of the best AI around. I didn't really come across many examples in F.E.A.R 2 where that carried over. I don't think it was a result of the AI getting dumbed down, but more in regards to level design. Looking at reviews for the 360 and PS3 versions of the first F.E.A.R, it seems like the AI didn't receive any major downgrades compared to the PC release. Although if someone has played both the PC and console versions of the first F.E.A.R, please let me know in the comments how the AI compares. Level design for combat areas are much more linear. Few combat arenas give you that option of flanking. Again, while the environments in F.E.A.R were simple, they were designed that way to best complement the combat and the AI. As a result, there were next to no memorable combat arenas in F.E.A.R 2. There were countless numbers in the original. Here I found about less than a handful. And of course, it's because these areas are more like the original. They have verticality, enemies coming from various directions, there are multiple entrances for flanking. I can't help but think some higher-ups at Warner Brothers said, make it more like Call of Duty for the level design. I don't really see any other reason why that would be the case. However, its excellent combat and enemy AI are not the only things F.E.A.R is known for. How is the horror handled in F.E.A.R 2? The first F.E.A.R, while having some great atmosphere and elements of horror, did have room for improvement. Compare that to Condemned, another Monolith title that came just a month later after the first F.E.A.R. I felt that had the better mesh of its gameplay and horror approach. There are some improvements on the horror front here, but also a number of cases of one step forward, two steps back. The stripped-down lighting system doesn't give as much atmosphere as a result. F.E.A.R 2 has to make it up elsewhere. In many cases, that results in F.E.A.R 2 ramping up on screen filters and effects during its horror portions. It cuts down on the sound cues that the first F.E.A.R would use for these moments, a decision that I think was the wrong choice. A lot of these screen visual effects are too in your face. The centerpiece of horror of the series, Alma, returns. She's now all grown up and not in the best of moods after the events of the first F.E.A.R. We get some up close and personal time with her, including a very close and personal moment later in the game. At various points she'll come and grab us, at which point we have a QTE to swipe her away. Boy, these sure suck away all tension. They just come across as silly. Although there is a reason why she's doing this, more on that later.
You could even say she covets you. She's a coveter.
Horror with Alma works best here when she's out of reach, and F.E.A.R 2 does a great job showing the effects of how Alma affects others. Some of the game's best creepiest moments arise when we see others fall under her sway. So when the horror connects in F.E.A.R 2, it really knocks it out of the park. The best example being Wade Elementary School. It's become one of those well-known levels in the game, and for good reason. It's a masterclass in its horror, which we'll get to shortly. One welcome improvement were the use of ghost enemies. In the first game, near the end stretch, they popped out of these dimensions. I found them a bit lacking. How they would just float towards you and disappear like that when you shot them. They were fairly static. In F.E.A.R 2, they're a lot more animated, a lot more dynamic. Sure, they don't do a ton of damage and go down very quickly, but they have a much stronger presence as a result. So let's go through some of the highlights of the main campaign in the DLC Reborn, so spoilers ahead. In F.E.A.R 2 we're playing as Michael Beckett. Like the point man from F.E.A.R 1, he's a silent protagonist. We're part of the Strike Team Dark Signal. I like this crew, good camaraderie.
Shit! Why do I gotta get stuck with Bucket?
Because I don't like crybabies. Hey, somebody sure bled out fast.
Probably took one to the aorta.
The aorta? You think it was the carotid or the subclavian artery?
Dude, making fun of a man for his knowledge is a sign of insecurity.
You alright, Keen? I think they hit my aorta. Man, give it a rest.
The voice of Cortana is here. She has a bit of a potty mouth, which with this kind of crew I'm okay with.
What the fuck is going on? Fuck!
Enjoy them while you can. Most of the game will be separate from them besides audio chatter. Some will have gruesome fates in store. F.E.A.R 2 takes place during the last stretch of F.E.A.R and continues right after. We're sent to get Genevieve Aristide, president of Armacam. We didn't see her in the first F.E.A.R, although we did hear her plenty if you listen to the phone messages. Nice art collection she's got here. This is not a straightforward rescue. Our motley crew are being watched for this Harbinger project. They're checking our psychic abilities to control replicas without Alma. Harbinger? Controlling soldiers? That sounds familiar.
I am assuming direct control.
We now see Alma all grown up and the explosion that occurs at the end of F.E.A.R 1 from the penthouse. It's a great, visceral scene.
What the hell was that? Did we just hit you? Oh my God.
Upon awakening, we're under the surgeon's knife. It cuts back between first and third person. This scene is very much a missed opportunity. Remember the Quake 4 Strogification scene? I haven't even played Quake 4 and I know that one. For something I covered recently on my channel, Bioshock Infinite Burial at Sea has a lobotomy scene that's tough to sit through. Here, there's no weight to the surgery. It comes across as silly and overdone, when this could have been a game highlight.
We need to stabilize before progressing. He's unstable. Progressing now would be a mistake. You're putting...
It It should have been more low-key, less over the top, and from the first person the entire time to witness. That would have been memorable. But hey, now we can make use of slow motion. Time to get out of this hospital. Now this section is quite a drag. It falls far short of the hospital section extraction point, which to me was one of the highlights of the first game. While F.E.A.R 2 is well paced, it doesn't have a ton going for it until we reach the surface. There is a TV that shows what's been going on. We need more of this kind of exposition, not the kind of finding intel to stand around and read. This is another major change to F.E.A.R 2 in how it handles exposition. In the first F.E.A.R, we could access a computer to give us an audio update. We could listen to answering machines to help flesh the world out. Here it's all intel, you have to stop and read, which in some games works just fine. But here it interrupts the flow. It worked just fine in the original with that approach. I'm puzzled why they made the switch. A man named Snakefist, an unknown party, will contact us to help.
Who the hell are you?
You can call me Snake Fist.
Snake Fist? Are you fucking kidding me?
He's the game's equivalent of Norton Mapes from the original, serving as comic relief. I love Norton from the first game.
Want some cheesy poos? Get your own.
Snakefist here is mostly just a voice in their earpiece throughout F.E.A.R 2. Some of the humor lands here. It's not like Monolith or the Stranger being able to land with their humor. Although I found the humor didn't quite land the same way it did with Norton. As we're all separated, we're trying to get back together. This is where we start to see how Alma affects various members of our team, picking them off one by one throughout the campaign. We reunite with Genevieve and Stokes.
Doc, this thing isn't gonna sterilize him or anything, right? That would be the least of my concerns.
Sounds like Stokes has a thing for us. Maybe she wants to see Michael's Beckett, if you catch my drift. Shit hits the fan and we get introduced to one of my favorite aspects of F.E.A.R 2.
Good morning, Chickpea.
Well, that's a memorable line for an introduction. This is Colonel Vanek. I love this guy. Good morning, Chickpea is such an odd yet memorable line. I was always happy when he popped up.
I was hoping you'd show up here. Now I can bury you where you belong, along with the rest of this unnatural fuckery. Bye now, see you in hell. Son, you get us through that door if you have to chew a hole in it. Yes, sir. Guess it's gonna come down to who needs a potty break first.
I was thinking he'd see his end through Alma, but nope, it's through us. And it's done through a QTE. Not this time frame of gaming. I'm glad these are mostly gone now. And speaking of QTEs, we have to deal with these little buggers. I will commend the way they dart around. Although if they do catch us, we have to do a QTE to swipe them away. 2009, ladies and gentlemen. Some of our teammates, however, weren't so lucky with the surgery.
We have to help her. Can you hear? She's crying.
And some of our team are getting pretty protective of Alma. She doesn't approve of them, however, and they get introduced to her tentacles.
Stay away from her. She's mine.
Yeah, insert some Rule 34 joke here. We get into this rhythm of combat against ATC security, then some atmospheric downtime. There's not much really to mention here for memorable combat arenas during this stretch. Although in the underground, there is some great atmospheric sections with the experiments they've been doing. And it's here where replica soldiers are reintroduced into the fold. Sadly, they're a shadow of what they were in the original. Not just AI, which is more due to the level design, but also in their dialogue. Even if a number of the lines are the same, their bark lacks bite. Getting to the surface is where F.E.A.R 2 starts to pick up. It still falls short of the original, but it's noticeably better than the fairly lackluster beginning. One excellent addition are these Puppet Master enemies, the Remnant. They take quite a bit of damage before they go down. They'll run about summoning the dead to use against us. They're used incredibly well, but F.E.A.R 2 greatly underuses them. There's less than a handful of encounters with them during the main campaign. They easily could have gotten way more mileage out of them. The bit where we get the sniper rifle to help Stokes is one of the game's highlights combat-wise. It comes closest to recapturing the magic of the original. There are a number of snipers to deal with, a number of floors to deal with, so verticality is a factor. Multiple entrances where enemies can roll through. That's the F.E.A.R we all know and love. There's also some nice catharsis again to control an elite powered armor unit for a time. And they bring back the parking lot music from the original. We make our way to Wade Elementary, that level, the one that makes F.E.A.R 2 at least worth checking out. It's one of those master classes in designing a horror level. Well, that's what it's most known for, but it also does a wonderful blend of horror to combat and back to horror with some excellent pacing. There's tons of great world building here. This was a school to teach gifted children to be like Alma with psychic abilities. Beckett was a student. The videos on the television and the projectors are very unsettling.
Easily resolved by taking a small trip to your friendly nurse station. Oh, there's the doctor now. Hello, doctor. I've got another one for you.
This is the beginning. Playground.
I love the bit of running into one of the remnants plucking away at the piano. Well, there's this one piece with the students on the wall with Alma and what I'm guessing are some of the development team that feels a bit out of place. And wait, there's squirrels? Furries? Were there furries on the dev team at Monolith? Maybe the whole what the fuck ending is one of these developers' fetishes. We eventually got to meet Snakefist face to face, and then he's promptly killed off as the assassins are reintroduced into the fold. I felt the assassins worked quite well here in F.E.A.R 2. I found they came across as more aggressive than they were in the original. Like the remnant enemies, it's something they could have gotten a fair amount more mileage out of. Hell, replace these encounters with those little buggers and it would have been a lot better, I think. They're more enjoyable to deal with, and they deliver plenty of tension and suspense. We make our way to another subway station level. This was the weakest section of the base game. Here, it's better, it's much shorter and better paced. One of our teammates gets pulled away by Alma, who we chase after. There's some damn creepy parts here involving this chase. The end stretch does have some of the better set pieces and combat arenas in the game, like the tram section. We're constantly moving back and forth, looking at ground level and above for replicas after us. Again, more of the game needed to be like this. It was there, it was just unfortunately designed to be otherwise. Then there's this really dumb turret bit, but dumb in the good way. The kind where you chuckle and shake your head at the absurdity. This is due to the music choice. What's with this song? The guy screaming sounds like he was trying to do his best Billy Corgan impression. I know some people hate this bit, but I loved it. Now, I will say that I think this turret scene shift happened earlier, as the ending is just around the corner, has a very big tonal shift. I think a little more time needed to be given to build that atmosphere. Perhaps the turret section of the subway should have made use of it. And speaking of memorable, yeah, the ending of F.E.A.R 2. Memorable in the what the fuck just happened kind of way. Yeah, remember that whole thing Snakefist said about Alma coveting you? Yeah, you're that free pizza at anime convention when you're having this final battle as time passes by very quickly.
Never happened.
And now it looks like someone has a bun in the oven.
fuck is going on? Fuck!
Well, F.E.A.R 2's ending is one of the more memorable ones in the game, although not exactly what I say in a good way. It's incredibly fucked up and like, well, where do you go from here? Well, that may be a story we cover for another day. I mean, this happens all at the last stretch, if there were hints of it throughout. Condemned 2, also by Monolith, had a story that went some, well, very interesting directions. That was in the last quarter to fifth of the game. Here, it's the last 10 minutes or so. On the story front, there's not a whole lot to say about the story in F.E.A.R 2. It's well told, but meanders and covers plenty of ground that the first game already did. But that's not all to F.E.A.R 2. While it's incredibly short, the Reborn DLC is very well done. The level design falls much more in line with the original, and gives the AI a much better chance to shine. What starts off as a simple power trip and power armor leads to some pretty interesting twists and turns. Just like Timegate Studios, Monolith obviously wanted to bring Paxton back into the fold. How? Because reasons. Here we play as a replica soldier, Foxtrot 813. After a brief stint of working with other replica soldiers, Paxton gets in touch with us and we betray our team, and then we're on the run.
They are meaningless now. They are ghosts. Must set me free.
Command, Foxtrot 813 attack the squad. They're all down.
Foxtrot 813, report.
You are meaningless now.
One great little detail are these vague, cryptic mission objectives we get as we progress forward. And it does have an interesting ending, although different from the base game.
Let me look upon you. I have dreamed of this moment, my brother. Reborn.
With that, what's the overall experience of F.E.A.R 2 like? I do want to talk a bit more about the consoleization of F.E.A.R 2. I think the game doesn't seem as downgraded as I once thought. Sure, aspects like particle effects, environmental damage, and physics had to be downgraded to play ball with consoles. But when the level design allows for it, or does in a few sections, the AI gets to shine and be more like the original. But then there's also good stretches of the game where the level design gets in the way. Large stretches of mostly linear combat arenas. Call of Duty influence made its way into the game's DNA. So while there are a number of downgrades due to having to get things running on consoles, I think more of the larger issues arise from the design decisions made with the game. Which does make it frustrating, as there are some fantastic stretches of F.E.A.R 2 that live up to the original, but a whole bunch of these issues result in consoleization and the codification pile up on one another. End result is an above average military shooter from the late 2000s with horror elements, which is fine, but when you're the follow-up of one of the best FPS titles around, that's quite the bummer. Thanks for watching.